Real quick before we jump into the video, guys, for the rest of this year I'm going to be on a fundraising campaign to raise a minimum of £1,000 for the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. For more information on the charity and what it does, and for the donation links, please look in the description below. And thank you all for your continued support. Enjoy the show. What's going on, guys? Right, Mommy Teacher announced that I'm here with a video regarding Pokemon Unite and a patch dropping tomorrow, August the 4th. I'm a little bit late to this party in terms of making this, but I wanted to talk about a lot of the balance changes because we all know that Pokemon Unite's Pokemon, some of them feel pretty underwhelming, some of them feel pretty overwhelming right now, and there are some very interesting buffs and nerfs. Maybe some people may not be too impressed by the Gengar buff, but we shall see. But huge thank you to Cerebeat.net for putting all of this in one place. I definitely appreciate that, of course. So, let's get straight on into the patch, shall we? So, first thing to note, one thing that's really cool that's coming is Spectator Mode. Definitely really excited to see that. Spectator Mode is always going to be fun. But let's go through the patch, let's go through the changes, and let's start with Charizard, of course. Charizard for an all-rounder has always been pretty underwhelming. It's generally kind of memed on that if you're picking Charizard, you might as well auto-report, because Charizard's cooldowns are way too long, which is something that's worth noting, and also its damage feels somewhat underwhelming. So, looking at Flamethrower first, the cooldowns reduced and the effects have been strengthened, which is pretty much the main story for Charizard, is lower cooldowns and a bit better damage. So if you didn't know, Flamethrower actually burns the target that it hits, and it also increases your movement speed. It doesn't really say, and there is no clear thing. I've done a lot of digging to see if I can find what specifically has been buffed on the effects, or the actual ratios, etc. There's not really been anything listed publicly, so not really sure what it is. But I would imagine it's probably increased burn damage as well as a slight buff to the movement speed. I don't think the movement speed was that much of an issue, because Charizard can still gap close with the movement speed it already has. Plus, there's always a jack button at X speed if you wanted to go down that route anyway. But I would imagine a small little bit of movement speed buff would be kind of nice for it, as well as the extra burn damage. Fire Punch is getting its effects increased as well. Fire Punch is a small displacement. I don't think they would really change that, but I definitely think the burn damage would increase. Fire Blast is a way too long cooldown. It was 11 seconds to start with. The cooldown's been reduced. Again, they haven't specifically said what to. I'm sure we'll find out when the patch comes by and the effects have increased. Fire Blast is an AoE damage ability that actually slows. I would imagine the slows increase because Fire Blast is pretty easy just to walk out of right now. So I'd imagine the slows increase so the burn damage stacks up a little bit better. That would be pretty nice for Charizard, just to increase its overall damage profile, because its damage profile is not super great right now for an all-rounder. Next up on the buff list is Talonflame. Talonflame is generally the weakest of the speedsters. It's pretty solid. It's good to see that it's just increased damage across the board. Extra attack power. Talonflame can burst people if you've got really strong items. But right now, Talonflame compared to a lot of the other speedsters in the format, especially Pokemon like Zeraora, just feels really mediocre. It's like, why play Talonflame when you can play Zeraora and Absol that generally do a lot more damage. But so it's just an increase in damage profile across the board. Pretty nice to see that. Next up is Venusaur. Venusaur, honestly, just really sucks compared to a lot of the attackers in the format. It's just such a mediocre option. So I'm not actually entirely sure what the effect on Sludge Bomb is. I know it's probably a poison of sorts, but I just want to check. So the effect is become poison and then lowered Spadef and movement speed. That's how Sludge Bomb is. So they've increased the damage on it, which is kind of nice. The damage is not great. The tick damage is not super strong. So they've increased the damage, which is nice. And the effect, I can see it being even lower Spadef. That could be kind of scary, for sure. But the poison damage is probably what I expect to see a little bit more effect. Pedal Dance is effective movement speed, which is kind of nice. Because the one problem with Pedal Dance is while it is an AoE, it's an AoE around Venusaur, and Venusaur being a ranged attacker doesn't really want to be in the middle of a fight if it can avoid it. So Petal Dance with the moves whose increase is pretty strong. It is definitely increased movement speed and probably increased damage as well. Solar Beam getting its cooldown reduced, definitely worth it. 11 seconds is too long, especially for an ability that's not even targeted. It is literally just firing essentially a snipe shot. It's quite a long-ranged ability, but it's a very thin line. The Unite move actually getting increased damage, which is pretty nice. The Unite move is kind of strong, but it's not the most powerful out there. There are better Unite move in terms of damage output, so that's kind of nice. We get to see extra damage output coming out. I wonder if it's going to be somewhat increased to like Cinderace's G-Max Fireball damage, because that Fireball damage is insane on Cinderace. But yeah, not super clear. We don't actually know the actual stats yet. Absol with some bug fixes on his auto. I've noticed that Absol's auto attacks sometimes didn't go off, so I'm guessing that's the bug fix. They haven't said. A nice Slash and Sucker Punch getting increased damage. So Absol's actually always been in a decent spot. There's not really been an issue with Absol in terms of raw damage output, particularly with Psycho Cut. I think this is just some quality of life changes just to make Absol's build paths a little bit more flexible. For an expert level speedster, it just doesn't feel like running anything other than Psycho Cut and Pursuit is worth it. So the increased damage is kind of nice. It gives you the extra option. I don't know if it's going to be enough to replace, or certainly not in Sucker Punch's case. I don't think it's going to be enough to replace Psycho Cut. So we will see how that goes, but definitely interesting to know that Absol got a bit of love. Wigglytuff feels like such a really bad supporter right now. Wigglytuff really just does not survive a lot of hits. It's kind of weak, especially when you consider the fact that Eldegoss exists. Wiggly just did not feel all that impressive. So getting some base stat buffs, which is nice. HP defense and special defense make it a little bit more durable, which allows you to have more chance of landing your Sing, which is pretty nice. Double Slap is getting increased damage, which feels pretty good. As well as the effects. I believe Double Slap stuns, if I remember right. Let's see. Oh, it's a slow. Yeah, that's what I thought. So it's several attacks, and the slows probably increase. This gives you a better chance of landing the Sing. The Sing itself is also getting increased effect, which is pretty nice. Probably a further increased reduction in defense, which is nice. It does actually have defense reducing capabilities. Sing, obviously, if it stays in the stack for too long, then your opponent is put to sleep, and that's an AoE around Wigglytuff. So the extra durability allows the Sing to go off a little bit easier, and the defense drops are pretty handy for your teammates. Double Slap getting increased damage and better slows as well is always nice, and Dazzling Gleam is getting some bug fixes. Not actually sure what those bug fixes are. Not actually entirely sure about that, but we'll see what happens. So Eldegoss definitely seemed super broken as a support. Like, if you had support Eldegoss, it basically dominated lanes, and if you're pairing it up with Snorlax, for example, Snorlax just becomes unkillable. So Eldegoss getting some much needed nerfs. Cotton Guard's getting a cooldown increased, a haste, as well as the HP restoration dropped. Cotton Spore, interestingly though, is getting buffed, which is kind of an interesting one. I actually ran Cotton Spore quite a lot on my Eldegoss, so I'm kind of intrigued as to why they buffed Cotton Spore, but they obviously nerfed Cotton Guard. Cotton Guard was just insanely strong. The HP recovery was kind of nuts as well for a cooldown that was only 7 seconds, so that's kind of nice. Is Cotton Spore getting increased effects? I'm a little bit unsure on Eldegoss, the actual effect on it. I haven't played a lot of support. Damage absorbing Zors, which then bursts to slow nearby opponents, so it's probably an increased slow effect. Maybe a slight increase of damage, but it doesn't really say that. The move special defense per def increase has been strengthened. Yeah, that's what it doesn't actually necessarily say that, but that's the upgraded Cotton Spore, so that's worth pointing that out. The upgraded Cotton Spore is getting a buff. And the Unite move, the HP restoration is going down. So this is basically just to make sure that Eldegoss is just not like a heal bot that just literally just makes everybody unkillable. I could imagine it's probably not too big a nerf though, because it's going to work out. Still, that Eldegoss is just incredibly strong. So Cinderace is getting some damage nerfs. The attack stat is going down, which is pretty nice. The attack stat combined with Muscle Band and Scope Lens just does so much damage, it's kind of nuts. And add Float Stone for that extra attack as well is terrifying. Blaze Kick is getting a bit of a nerf to the damage output, which is not too surprising because Blaze Kick always crits if I remember correctly. Just gonna check that because I know I've been critting a lot with it. Although I do have a Scope Lens, so that might be part of the reason why. Yeah, guaranteeing a crit and burning. So, yeah, with it being a guaranteed crit, getting the attack damage just taken off a little bit just takes away a little bit of that raw power, which kind of means you need to replace that with your item power. Feint activation time and movement speed increase reduced, which is pretty strong. Feint is a very, very powerful ability. Being able to dodge damage and run away or run forward into the enemy base while you're up with Zapdos. Definitely very, very powerful, so not too surprised to see that the activation time is a little bit lower, so the immunity isn't too overpowered, and of course the movement speed going down. Pyro is getting a little bit of a damage nerf as well. Pyro, even though in my opinion it's the weaker option than Blaze Kick, I do think it's very, very strong into range matchups, so just taking a little bit of the damage off. Not too surprised to see that. Gengar! Gengar is an interesting one, because Gengar is one that I think a lot of people were expecting a nerf to, but actually Gengar's getting buffs. Although slight nerf to Hex, but I don't think this damage decrease is going to matter too much. I think the fact that it constantly resets is pretty disgusting. The invulnerability frames reduced is pretty nice, but I don't think it's going to matter that much. Basic attack's getting some bug fixes. I'm not actually entirely sure what the bugs were on the auto attack. I've not really experienced too many myself. Shadow Ball's getting increased damage, which is nice, but I don't feel like it's going to be all that impactful, given that Sludge Bomb just feels so much better. Hex is getting a bit of a nerf. The damage is going down slightly, which means it's probably going to take you 1 or 2 more Hexes to kill things, but the fact that Hex could, like, 3-kill Snorlax, and 3-kill Slowbro just feels so busted. So Hex getting a little bit of a nerf. Dream Eater getting some extra move speed, but again, it just feels like such a weaker option to Hex. I don't know why you would ever run it, but it depends on how big of a nerf the damage is on Hex. We don't have any specifics, so we don't quite know. If Hex is still able to 4-hit KO defenders, then I think we're going to have an issue with that, but we will see. Zeraora getting some bug fixes on the Spark, which is nice. Wild Charge getting increased damage and lower cooldown. Wild Charge definitely is a much weaker option than Discharge right now, so this gives you a little bit of extra flexibility. Nice to see the cooldown going down, because that was my biggest bugbear with Wild Charge, is the cooldown was way too long. And then the Unite move getting a little bit of a damage hit was definitely worth it, because this Unite move just shreds everything that gets caught in it. So, having the damage nerf feels pretty respectful. Cramorant getting a bit of an interesting thing. Adjustment, a bit of decreased damage on the Whirlpool. Whirlpool just felt like so obnoxious. If you get caught in it, it just does so much damage. I got half-elfed by Cramorant on a Slowbro, which is pretty unacceptable damage. And then Dive getting a little bit of an increased damage as well, just to give you an extra option if you really wanted to run Dive instead. I haven't seen anybody running Dive on a Cramorant. I feel like most people just run everything else. Machamp getting some bug fixes on the basic attack, getting a decreased damage in Cross Chop. Cross Chop just does ridiculous amount of damage. And Close Combat getting a buff, which feels kind of obnoxious to me. Close Combat was already strong. I don't see a reason for you to buff it, but I think a lot of people have been running Cross Chop anyway. Lucario getting some bug fixes on Power Up Punch and Bone Rush. Not actually entirely sure what the bugs are. They don't actually say what the actual bugs themselves are. But this is probably to tidy up Lucario's damage output, because Lucario does insane amount of damage with this combo. Both Power Up Punch and Bone Rush are insanely strong right now. I don't know if there's any multiplier that shouldn't be applying or whatever. Gren's getting some basic attack fixes, which is nice, and Alola Ninetales' passive is getting some bug fixes. So some pretty nice bug fixes in general, which feels pretty good. But generally speaking, we're going to see a lot of interesting changes. I think we're going to start seeing a lot less Eldegoss. We might see some increase in use of Wigglytuff. Charizard may actually not get memed on for whatever. So quick TLDR for you. Charizard's getting a better damage output and lower cooldowns. Talonflame is getting extra damage across the board. Venusaur's getting increased damage and some slightly lower cooldowns on some of his abilities. Absol's getting some bug fix and increased damage on the moves that you typically don't run it on. Wigglytuff getting base stat increases and effects and damage on its abilities getting fixed. Eldegoss getting slight nerfed onto Cotton Guard, but buffed to Cotton Spore and slightly weaker Unite move. Cinderace getting lower damage output across the board and a reduced activation on Feint. Gengar getting buffs to its other optional moves, but a slight nerf to Hex. Zeraora getting slight hike cooldown, down increase on Wild, or cooldown decrease on Wild Charge, and lower damage on Unite. Cramorant getting an increase to Dive, but weaker Whirlpool. Machamp getting some bug fixes and increased power on close combat. And Lucario, Greninja, and Ninetales getting some small little bug fixes. Definitely a pretty interesting patch. Let me know what you think about the changes down below. Who are you going to be picking up, potentially? And what are you most excited for? I'm definitely excited to hear. But either way, guys, thanks so much for watching. My name is Rob, I'm your teacher. Stay safe. Stay awesome. I'll catch you guys next time. Take care. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. And if you liked the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn the notification bell on so that you never miss an upload. We upload every single day on this channel. Make sure you're following me on all of my social medias on the screen right now. And a huge shout out to the Shiny Rabombies of this month: Araya Jade, The Crazed Artist, Mr. Burns 1988, and Average Gaming 017. Thank you all for your continued support.